In order to understand the context of war photographer, it's quite important to just think about war in general and the theme of war, and kind of think about your connection to war as an individual. In the modern world, especially in the modern Western world, which most people who are studying this poem will be from, me included, we don't experience war directly all that much. Normally, when we think of war, it's something to do with something we've read in a newspaper. It might be reports or, reels of different atrocities that are going on around the world. It might be a connection to our own past and our own history. So for me personally, my granddad was an RAF pilot, so he was trained to fly planes in World War II, and he is the last person I know in my family to be directly involved in a war. Obviously my gran was in World War II as well, but she didn't fight. Although she'd have been good if she'd been allowed to fight, I think, because she's quite fierce. But yeah, we have this idea of war being very removed from modernity, from our present reality. And so Duffy raises this ethical question about, is that fair? Is it right, the way that we experience war? Is it somehow gratuitous? Is it just kind of weird that we almost enjoy watching these wars going on in far off places and feeling how terrible it must be, but also not really doing anything directly about it? And the war photographer in the poem is a journalist whose job it is to kind of facilitate that interaction between Western people reading newspapers who are very removed from the reality of war and people who are right in the middle of the conflict. I say Western, but there are a few Western conflicts that are also mentioned in the poem, so I'll go through that in a second. But yeah, the main thing is this detachment, this distance that we get from the reality of war versus what's going on here with when we read it or watch it or look at pictures of it from afar. So the first thing I'm going to do is just go through what she's talking about when she references different specific wars in the poem. She talks specifically about 3 different places, so we'll just have a look at that in a second. She actually just reduces these to a very short list of single word or 2-word sentences. Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, and it's like a compression of information. So all of these wars, when you're in the middle of them and it's part of your culture, your family, your history and your landscape, it's very, very big and it's a huge part of your life. And she's making the point by compressing all of these that it's not a big part of our lives. It's just something we look at in the Sunday supplement, the paper at the weekend. We think about it for a few minutes and we think, oh, that's terrible, and then we move on with our lives. So Duffy's directly critiquing the way that we engage with these kind of wars in a sort of indirect, detached context. So a lot of war poems are directly about war. They're about a specific war, and they are about the poet's direct experience of war. Like if you read Wilfred Owen, for example, he's an amazing war poet who was a soldier, and his poems are a way of him processing what happened to him. Duffy has not been in war directly. She's aware of that, and she's respectful of the fact that she was not a soldier. She's not directly in conflict in any way. So what she's doing is she's removing herself and detaching herself, and she's also viewing war through the lens of a photographer who was a real journalist at the time that she knew. And she's thinking about where has he been and what has he seen and how does he process or come to terms with all of this different conflict and violence and devastation and destruction that he's experiencing on a weekly basis. So yeah, it mentions these 3 places, and I'm just going to go through these in a little bit more detail. So Belfast is Northern Ireland. This is a Western conflict, and between the 1960s and 1990s, it was an active conflict between the Catholics and the Protestants in Ireland, and also separatists who want to make Ireland into its own country, separate from the UK, and people who want to remain part of the UK and be connected to the other countries, including England and the United Kingdom. So, yeah, it's a very complex tension that goes on for 30 years actively, but it's still kind of raging now. The devastation and the destruction from that, and the kind of dislocation of people who are involved in in the active troubles, as they were called. So yeah, you have one tension between Catholics and Protestants. These are both Christian, but they have very different beliefs, very different outlooks on life, and in many ways in Ireland they don't view themselves as culturally compatible. They view themselves as very distinctive. And you also have people who want to turn Ireland into its own unified country, because at the moment Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland are separate. They're kind of partitioned off, I guess, and by a border, and only Northern Ireland is part of the UK. So people in Northern Ireland want to, sometimes some of them want to join Southern Ireland, make Ireland into its own country, and then other ones want to stay part of the UK, if that makes sense. There's a very long history of Irish people feeling oppressed by the English and feeling that they were almost colonised, as if they were a different, colonial country. And and that they have their own distinctive culture, their own language, their own identity. So it's a very valid opinion to hold that they should be their own country. They shouldn't really be connected to the UK. But equally, they have been part of the UK for so long, and a lot of their culture is tethered to England and to the other countries in the UK, Scotland and Wales. And so it's equally valid to understand why people would want to be on the other side and think that they should still be part of that country. So from an outsider perspective, you can see the argument on both sides. And from an insider perspective, you get people who are part of families that have a specific religion or a specific political belief, and all of their friends and all of their family have the same belief, and they don't understand why other people in Ireland have the opposite. That creates a conflict or a civil war that keeps going on, and it doesn't resolve for a really long time. So while it's not resolved, anyone living in Ireland in that moment is just in constant fear of bombs going off or terrorist attacks happening, or the streets erupting into violence, and that happens really regularly, and they just have to learn to live with the reality of that being something that happens. Seamus Heaney has a really good poem called Storm on the Island that is more precisely about that conflict. So read Storm on the Island if you're interested in that. So Beirut, completely different city, different part of the world, Middle East, and the capital city of Lebanon in this case. And there's another really long ongoing civil war. So a civil war is when there's a fight within the country between different groups of people. And so in this case, it's a mixture of religious, political and cultural beliefs, and there are specifically tensions between Sunni and Shia Muslims, which is, you see that kind of interplayed in, throughout the world with any kind of Muslim country. Also Christians, because you have a mixture of Christianity and Islam within Lebanon. So all of that creates these kind of tensions where people within the country feel that they're underrepresented or they're not represented, or their particular belief set and their particular way of viewing things is it should be the identity of their country, and it's not. So that creates, again, this type of civil war. Phnom Penh is a little bit different, so we'll just kind of go into this one quickly as well. So Cambodia is a country in Asia, and Phnom Penh is the capital city. There was a civil war that broke out there in the late 1960s, which also is kind of adjacent to the Vietnam War that the Americans are fighting against the Vietnamese in Vietnam itself. So both of these are part of the same kind of wider global conflict, which is a tension between communism and capitalism. So Asian countries and non-Western countries sort of in the late 1800s onwards started adopting communism as a way to kind of, structure your country or run your government. And communism is a very different political structure to capitalism. They're not compatible. So there was a feeling by a lot of people that communism was going to spread through the entire world, and eventually capitalism would be replaced by communism, which was a more modern system. And in this time, people believed that that was definitely true. And so what happened here was, from China and Russia, communism is spreading out towards the rest of Asia and quite successfully starting to take over countries there, for example, Vietnam. And at the same time, the US and other parts of the Western world are highly resistant to the spread of communism because it completely changes their culture and their political systems and their government. They don't want to turn into communist countries, so they are really kind of championing capitalism and being really sort of strictly protective of their own government and their own culture by going and fighting wars that are intended to prevent the spread of communism. So unfortunately, Phnom Penh is a place where this tension kind of plays out. So there's the government of Cambodia and then another party, a political party called the Khmer Rouge. And the Khmer Rouge are crazy, extreme people. I recommend reading more about them if you're interested. But they're a communist party, and they genuinely believe that communism is the way forward for Cambodia. And they are pressurizing the government of Cambodia, which creates, again, a civil war similar to Beirut, similar to Belfast. But this time it escalates into a global conflict. So the US gets involved, Vietnam gets involved, because they have this war already that's going on where they're trying to spread or kind of fight back against communism. So there's an escalation here where other countries start getting involved, and it becomes a more intense sort of way of a more intense global conflict rather than just a local national conflict. So yeah, hopefully the context of these makes more sense to you. I'm just going to finish today with like a little task. So I've got some images from Phnom Penh, Belfast, and Lebanon, Beirut. And I want you to just have a quick look through these images. I'll zoom in a little bit and sort of scroll through them. You can pause if you like and have a look at them. And think about the similarities and differences between these war photographs. Because to me, what's fascinating is they actually look really similar. They look almost like they could all come from the same place. And not just because they're black and white, but because of the way that humanity is behaving in these photographs. So this actually ties in with Duffy's purpose or meaning of the poem as well, which is that if you look at war from a distance perspective, it becomes more about how humans behave in a global way. So even if we're from different cultures, we speak different languages, the way that war plays out within countries is terrifyingly similar, and the conflicts themselves can have very different root causes, but the outcome of devastation, both on the landscape and the individuals within that, and then rippling out to the wider world, is always the same. So yeah, hopefully you're feeling a lot more confident on all of this, and you feel like you could write an essay about it as well. This document I'm using today is from the Scribbly revision guides. So yeah, I make revision guides, teaching resources, video courses, and so on a platform called scribbly.com. And if you need any help with revision, feel free to check that out and have a look through, see if anything's useful for you. You can download this from there as well. I'll put a link to where you can get this revision guide in the comments below the video as well. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, and hopefully I've helped you understand the poem, and yeah, see you soon in a future video lesson. Bye for now.